and families. Now, education. And they manage over 2,000 acres in the priority geography. And one of the biggest opportunities and also a challenge here are the aquatic passage barriers that we would like to remove on the streams sometime in the future. Our other priority geography is the Upper Osage grasslands. The Upper Osage grassland encompasses some of the most diverse native tallgrass prairie in the state, located in the Osage Plains of west central Missouri. The landscape spans about 139,000 acres of public and private land. 13,000 of those acres is managed by MDC. Last weekend, we had a great prairie event with the Nature Conservancy. Prairie Day invites visitors to come and learn about tallgrass prairie, the flora and the fauna, and just enjoy being out on the prairie that day. Science is also, with our prairies, going to be doing research on Mead's milkweed, and of course we have the long-term patch-burn grazing study. And in addition to Upper Osage grasslands, as far as those prairies down south, we also have prairies in other portions of the region. Total prairies for the whole region is about 14,000 acres. Wetlands, we have a wide variety of wetlands across the region. They total about 10,000 acres, 3,000 are opportunistic, and 7,200 are more intensively managed wetlands. And our biggest priority there, of course, is Shell Osage and the Golden Anniversary Wetland Initiative, where we're partnering with Ducks Unlimited. We have 300 acres of glade. I pointed out two of our major ones, which are conservation opportunity areas. One is a sandstone glade and the other is a limestone. And of note here, our natural history biologist, through her survey work on our glades, has helped us delist both yellow false mallow and geocarpet. We also have a variety of woodland and forest. I've picked out both Baltimore Men Conservation Area, Big Buffalo Creek, and then down south we have Horton Bottoms, which is part of Four Rivers, and that is one of the largest bottomland hardwood forests on the western part of the state. Another resource we have are our aquatic landscapes, the biggest of which is the Missouri River. And we see the Missouri River as an opportunity of connecting Kansas Cityans with the river. In that lower right-hand photo, we have an alternative methods catfishing clinic where people get to sign up and go out and catch catfish. And our staff teach them how to do it. It is extremely popular and it filled up really fast. Our fisheries management staff also manage about 12 MDC-owned lakes in the region. We have 6 partner-owned lakes with the Corps of Engineers in DNR. We have 14 accesses, and we have 50 community access program lakes. Science is going to be working, Truman Reservoir is probably one of our biggest resources, and they will be starting a new look at the catfish slot length limit and assessing the effects after changing the regulation. We talked about the community conservation framework yesterday, so I know you're a bit familiar with this now. The region's community conservation team just finished the framework at the beginning of the year, and staff are beginning to develop ways to make the framework operational. They have been approving community conservation grants. So total for community conservation grants, we have allocated and spent $76,000 in the community in Kansas City. Trim grants, we have allocated $91,000, and an urban cost share, $5,400. And so staff are going to continue to find ways to build new partnerships within our Tier 1, 2, and 3 to further our community conservation efforts. Recreational opportunities abound within the region, from traditional uses like hunting and fishing to non-traditional uses like hiking, biking, kayaking, and birding. Staff this year opened up 207 miles of service roads to biking this year in the region. Highlight a couple, Settles Ford now has 32 miles open, and Four Rivers now has 19 miles open. Waterfowl hunting, because of all of our wetlands, is very popular. On our 4 major waterfowl areas, we had 13,000 hunting trips that harvested over 8,700 birds. Now, 2 of those areas are also extremely popular with birders. And so both Shallow Sage and Four Rivers are in the top 10 bird diversity areas on eBird, and we also have multiple spots on the Great Missouri Birding Trail within the region. Other opportunities in the region are kayaking. If you want to go kayaking in the Kansas City region, of course we have the Missouri River, but we also have the Duck's Head at Platte Falls, and you can park your car, get in your kayak or canoe, go all the way around, and end up back at your car again. So it's a unique experience, and you don't have to have someone carry your vehicle back and forth. Another popular pastime in the Kansas City region is dove hunting. So if you wanted to go dove hunting in the region, there's the Reed area, which has a very traditional base and people who go there every year, Platte Falls, Guybe Park, or Settles Ford. And then there's paddlefish. Paddlefish season is huge in the region, and we also offer another clinic called the Paddlefish Snagging Clinic. It fills up within 15 minutes for registration, and they have a huge waiting list. It is one of the most sought after clinics that we offer. And partners. You learned a lot about our partners yesterday and last night. Staff successfully implement Conservation Daily thanks to strong partnerships and have ties with 130 NGOs, government entities, and other groups throughout the region. We have our traditional partners that help us manage, renovate, and acquire land, like the Nature Conservancy, Missouri Prairie Foundation, Kansas City Wildlands, Burroughs Audubon, and of course Ducks Unlimited. We have unique partners like Backcountry Horsemen who help us. They have volunteers come and help maintain trails on Big Buffalo Conservation Area. We have our municipal partners like Jackson County Parks and also Kansas City Parks, where we partner with them on urban deer hunts. And we actually gave Kansas City and Jackson County both partner awards this year for their efforts with urban deer management. Wild Souls, we talked about with social media, but they also, with education, but they also partner with protection, and every Christmas have a Shop with a Cop event for underprivileged children in eastern Jackson County. We also have the Boys and Girls Club of Kansas City. We have our largest education event, which will be happening in June, called Discover Nature Field Days, and they bring in hundreds of kids as part of Boys and Girls Club to come and learn outdoor skills at the James A. Reed Memorial Wildlife Area. And let's see, did I miss anybody? Oh, and the Kansas City Zoo, the St. Louis Zoo, which we partner on for the American burying beetle and releasing them onto Wakanta. And then last but not least, our Missouri landowners. CPLC staff have conducted 884 on-site visits. 271 of those were farm bill programs with partnership with USDA. CPLC unit staff have also documented nearly 4,000 technical contacts this year. These are phone calls, emails, walk-ins, and contacts during presentations and programs. Okay. So we went through a lot of our priorities and opportunities, but we do have challenges. The Kansas City region coordinates the St. Clair Corps for CWD, chronic wasting disease, and so we have the St. Clair Corps and now the new Cedar Corps. We're also adding on Barton and Vernon counties for mandatory sampling. So the biggest challenge here is that as we keep getting positives and it grows, we're reaching staffing capacity for both mandatory sampling and targeted culling. Another huge challenge are paddlefish eggs. I don't know if you remember, several years ago there was a big investigation in the illegal possession and sale of paddlefish eggs, and that continues today. Agents this past paddlefish season contacted 2 individuals that had eggs illegally in their possession. Walnut theft is another issue in the region that has hit all over the region, both on public and private land, with individuals cutting down and then stealing logs off of our land and then our partner's land in private. We've had some successful prosecution of those individuals, and so the tough thing is catching them in the act. The other issue we're having is arson fire. We get lulls where it doesn't happen, but it's sprung up this year both on Truman land and also in Platte County. And lastly, staffing. I have to say I'm very happy that my vacancy list has gone, it's much smaller now, but it always seems like when we fill something, then we end up with another vacancy. The other issue with staffing is as we lose great experienced people through retirements, and the staff coming on are more inexperienced than we've had in the past, and so there's a large knowledge gap there and losing institutional knowledge, and so that's something that we're really going to have to be deliberate and think about with mentoring and setting up situations where we can train all these new staff coming on board. And with that, I am done. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed your tour.
Thank you, Deborah. Sure appreciate it. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Are there any items anybody wishes to pull? If not, can I have a motion to approve it?
Yes, sir. Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Michael.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director Pauly. The Regulations Committee met on April 14th to consider a series of recommendations related to the upcoming fall deer and turkey hunting seasons. A copy of each proposed rulemaking is included in your packet. Mr. Chairman, before I begin my formal report, recall that earlier this year the Commission voted to approve a series of recommendations for regulation changes associated with Community Assistance Program agreements, which were identified by the Regulations Committee during its annual review of the Wildlife Code. Following the Commission's initial consideration in February, those proposed rulemakings were filed with the Secretary of State's office and published in the Missouri Register, which initiated a 30-day public comment period. From April 2nd through May 1st, the Department received one comment asking for clarification on the proposed changes to the daily and length limits for crappie on Mazingo Lake. A summary of this input, along with the staff response, is included on final orders of rulemaking provided in your Commission packet, beginning on page 4. This presentation of orders of rulemaking as formal Commission action items signifies the final step in the Department's regulations process. The Commission has the authority to adopt as originally written, amend, or withdraw the proposed regulations. If approved today, these changes will be effective August 30th. Mr. Chairman, unless the Commission has any questions or concerns, I request approval of final orders of rulemaking for 3 CSR 10-12.109, closed hours, 10-12.110, use of boats and motors, 10-12.115, bullfrogs and green frogs, 10-12.125, hunting and trapping, 10-12.135, fishing methods, 10-12.140, fishing, daily and possession limits, and 10-12.145, fishing length limits, with no changes to the original recommendations.
Have a motion to that effect?
Motion.
Just kidding. Motion, yes. Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll move on to my formal report.
Sure.
As you'll recall, in December of 2021, the Commission voted to set dates for each portion of the 2022-2023 deer season to allow hunters as much time as possible to prepare for the following year's season. As a reminder, dates for the 2022-2023 firearms deer season are as follows. The early youth portion will be October 29th and 30th of this year. The November portion will be from the November 12th through the 22nd. The late youth portion will be November 25th through the 27th. The antlerless portion will run from December 3rd through the 11th. And the alternative methods portion will begin on December 24th of 2022 and end on January 3rd of 2023. Mr. Chairman, before I move forward with today's action items, it is my privilege to introduce Wildlife Health Program Supervisor Jasmine Batten and Service Program Supervisor Jason Isabel. Jasmine holds a Bachelor's of Science in Wildlife Ecology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She started her wildlife health career at the Wisconsin DNR, where she worked on topics ranging from chronic wasting disease to avian botulism in the Great Lakes. She came to the department in 2013 and has been heavily involved in leading chronic wasting disease efforts ever since. In recent years, she has studied public health at the University of Missouri and has been working to grow the department's wildlife health program with special attention given to creating and implementing sick and dead wildlife response protocols and systems, developing a wildlife health reporting system, and working alongside our state wildlife veterinarian in developing response plans for emerging wildlife disease threats, like those associated with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 in white-tailed deer and highly pathogenic avian influenza. Service Program Supervisor Jason Isabel holds a bachelor's degree in environmental and forest biology from the State University of New York and a master's degree in forestry and wildlife management from Stephen F. Austin State University in Texas. In 2010, Jason joined the department as our state's turkey and ruffed grouse biologist, and during the spring of 2019, Jason was promoted to his current role as Service Program Supervisor, where he oversees management of Missouri's deer and elk. Jasmine is here today to share an update on CWD, which will be immediately followed with a presentation by Jason of the 2022-2023 fall and deer turkey hunting season recommendations. And with that, I'll turn the podium over to Jasmine.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioners, Director Polly. Before I get started here, I just want to acknowledge that the work that Jason and I are going to share truly is the work of many individuals and not just us. We'd like to especially recognize the rest of our wildlife health program and survey programs, which include our survey biologists, Kevin Weiskirchen and Aaron Hildreth, and our wildlife health specialist, Alicia Burke. So I have a tall order here to update you on CWD in just about 12 minutes. I better look at the clock to keep myself on track. I'm going to start with a pretty broad overview of where we've been and where we are, and then a little bit about where we're planning on going. So our CWD journey began in Missouri, as many folks are aware, way back in 2002 when we first initiated our routine statewide CWD surveillance. We were very fortunate at that time not to find the disease. Fast forward to 2010, and we had our first confined cervid detections up in Lynn and Macon counties and captive facilities, and soon after in 5 free-ranging deer in Macon County. One really important distinction to mention is before that first time that we detected CWD in the state, we had tested over 33,000 deer across the entirety of the state, and so we had a really good confidence that the disease was indeed a relatively new introduction to our state. A few other key time points on our timeline journey with CWD to date. In 2014, we had our first CWD detections outside of northeast Missouri in Adair, Cole, and Franklin counties. And soon after, in 2016, we really upped our surveillance game and initiated mandatory sampling in our CWD management zone counties. In 2012, when we had our first detections, we implemented a CWD response plan. The goals of that plan at the time were to continue to detect the disease as early as possible in new areas, to monitor the disease for changes in prevalence and distribution over time, to apply management interventions to limit the further spread, and to provide accurate and relevant information to our constituents. And I will say, although we've had a lot of adjustments and adaptation over time, these core goals really have remained solid, and even today as we're looking ahead, kind of remain the core of how we're looking at CWD management in our state. So a quick and really high-level overview of what our response currently is. There's really two components to how we're tackling CWD in Missouri. One is surveillance and the other is management. And we're talking about surveillance, that is a really systematic designed testing of a sample of our deer to meet specific goals and objectives. So kind of two main components of our surveillance plan. One is a broad statewide baseline surveillance based mostly on partnerships with taxidermists. So currently, for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been working with taxidermists on an annual basis across the entire state. This past year, we had about 120 participants. These are really important partners. Not only are they advocates for our CWD work and working on communications and such with our hunters, but they also are sampling primarily adult male deer, the sex and age class that has the highest prevalence of the disease, and therefore it's a way to kind of weight our surveillance and have a better detection rate with fewer samples collected. Additionally, we have our staff trained and informed to test sick deer across the state, another good detection tool. Our second piece of our surveillance plan on top of that baseline statewide surveillance is an increase in sampling of deer in our CWD management zones. So that includes, as a reminder, counties within 10 miles of any CWD detection. That increased surveillance is designed to have an even better chance of detecting early spread of the disease in those areas where we're most likely to find it. And then additionally, it's giving us really high resolution of data over time to really understand where the disease is, how it's changing, and then be able to assess our management over time. So what's the point of all the testing if we're not going to do anything, right? So our second piece of our response plan is indeed CWD management. And when we say management, we usually mean intervention or actual actions that are designed to slow the spread of the disease and address known risk factors. So kind of two approaches with intervention or management. The first is the broad application of more preventative regulations targeting known risks. So again, aimed at risk reduction. So within our CWD management zones, those counties within 10 miles of detection, we have a suite of regulations that we've been using that includes the restriction of feeding and placement of minerals, practices that are known to congregate deer and increase disease transmission. The second regulation is the removal of the antler point restriction. We have pretty good evidence that our young yearling bucks are the animals that are moving the greatest distances when they disperse, so they really have the greatest opportunity to move the disease with them across the landscape. And then most recently, I think last year, 2 years ago, in effect, we have introduced some carcass transport restrictions as well as some disposal requirements for processors and taxidermists, really trying to reduce the chance that hunters are going to move the disease around the state with them. The second management component is really our treatment, or the most direct tool that we have to intervene on the course of the disease spread, and that is the targeted removal of deer in areas where we find the disease. So, unfortunately, you can't look at the deer population and selectively pick out the infected deer, so the best proxy we can do is increase removals in a very close proximity to where we find cases. The first component of that management intervention is our CWD management permit program. So for landowners within 2 square miles of CWD detection that have at least 5 acres, they have the opportunity to get up to 10 additional permits during the normal deer season. They can allocate those permits to friends and family, and then they can use those permits for any sex deer throughout the entirety of the seasons. The other component of those permits, as kind of an incentive to potentially harvest additional deer, they are eligible to request processing reimbursement up to $75 for deer that they harvest on a CWD management permit and that they have tested for the disease. And then, of course, our post-season targeted culling, that really is the meat and bones of our management intervention. It's really the tool that's shown the most promise in other places of slowing the spread of the disease. It takes place between January 16th through March 15th. It's an incredible labor-intensive operation for our staff. Deb mentioned that they have their own culling operation here in Kansas City region. So now just a quick walkthrough. We won't go through every year of the disease or detections. It's really not that relevant, but just a snapshot to see really how our understanding of the distribution and the distribution of the disease itself has changed over the last 10 years that we've been dealing with it in Missouri. So on your left is the distribution map in 2012. The star is, there's two stars up there, one's covered up, but we have our confined big game hunting preserve facilities that were positive, and then the blue dots represent our first free-ranging detections in 2012. Fast forward to 2015, as I mentioned, we did see our first detections outside of Northeast Missouri, and at that time really decided that we needed to increase our surveillance. Fast forward today, it's not as pretty of a picture. We realize that, and if you look at those dots, they are blown up. Each dot is one positive deer. This last year, we tested over 32,000 deer in the state. Most of those were hunter-harvested deer, about 18,000 from opening weekend during mandatory sampling efforts. Just over about 3,200 of those were postseason targeted culling deer. And we had 86 positives this year in 18 counties. So certainly, when we look at this map, there's a lot of disappointment that the disease continues to spread. The good news is we continue to detect the disease early in new locations. Consistently, in locations where we find new detections, that percent of deer that's infected at the time is extremely low, and the distribution has been clustered. It's a good indication that it's an early course of the disease. So we're not just finding more deer because we're testing more. There is strong evidence that the disease is indeed spreading. And certainly locally, some of the areas where we've been working the longest, we are seeing geographic growth of the area where we're finding infected deer, but encouragingly, that percent of infected deer is extremely low and staying fairly steady. I think it's important to call out our new counties for the year. We did have 4 new positive counties: Berry, Christian, Howell, and Washington. Again, the number of infected deer very low in those locations, but just another indication that our area of disease that we're working with is growing and the challenges of responding are increasing. Also wanted to point out that we did have a few notable detections in our neighboring states. We work closely to follow the distribution of CWD in neighboring states and really understand what their surveillance plan is and response plan. So we had our first CWD positive in eastern Kansas, close to the Missouri border, and then another positive in southeast Arkansas, just south of the border. So certainly that's an increasing challenge to see distribution coming closer to us from our neighboring states. So where does that leave us? We certainly are finding ourselves at a bit of a crossroad as the distribution of the disease has continued to expand. On one hand, we've got a really solid response plan that has a lot of successes to date, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to respond at that same level and in that same way when we have this wide distribution and when we have such a variety of kind of disease conditions throughout the state. And so right now, Jason and I are heavily in the middle of a thorough review of our CWD response plan. It's not the first time this has happened. We have adapted over time, as realities have changed and as we've learned more about the disease. In the immediate future, so for this fall, we are using the existing regulatory framework. Jason will be in a little bit here proposing that we sample just a subset of our management zone counties with mandatory sampling this fall, but really the longer term goal that we're working on right now is this big overhaul and revision of our CWD response plan so that we can chart the path forward as realities are changing. So really quick, just really broad, high-level overview of what that process is like and what we're aiming to do. When we started this response plan, certainly we're getting input from staff and other experts in the agency, but Jason and I are coordinating it. And we started this effort thinking about how are we going to judge these really hard decisions we have. So really high-level idea of the criteria for what we think is going to guide our decisions on where to go with CWD. First of all, certainly we're going to want to make decisions that give us the greatest probability of slowing CWD spread. That really is, one of our top goals. But we also want to make sure that any changes that are going to be proposed over the coming year have a high predicted social success. Very aware that we cannot manage CWD without our hunters and our taxidermists and all our partners coming along with us. So that is equal priority along with slowing the disease. We also want to make sure any new regulations are understandable to stakeholders. And that's kind of just a given. And then we're asking really hard questions about sustainability, cost effectiveness, kind of, how do we keep giving it our all, but manage all the other changing priorities for the agency. I'm just going to go through the kind of key pieces of the plan that might be changing or what we're reviewing, and then wrap it up pretty quick here and turn over to Jason. So one of what I've been working on a lot is the review of our surveillance side of it. So, what has our surveillance to date told us, what's working, what's not working. So as we're looking at possibly making some changes to sampling, one of the most important things is understanding what our objectives are. So we want to make sure that we're designing a surveillance plan that's going to answer the questions that we need answered. We're taking into consideration what we already know about CWD in our state and beyond. The last 6 years of intensive surveillance have really given us a lot of information about how the disease is spreading and where. But on the flip side, we recognize there's still a lot of uncertainty. Not all of our neighboring partners can test as many deer, so we're going to be thinking about those factors too. We're evaluating the surveillance tools that we already have and identifying strengths and weaknesses. And then in terms of sampling, one of a kind of emerging, not issues, but emerging thing to be aware of is we seem to have more hunters concerned about having their deer tested before they consume their deer. And so we realize that even that beyond the science, we also need to be sure that we're meeting our hunter demand and keeping them confident in hunting and taking deer. There's a big focus on the targeted culling management intervention itself, since that is a really labor-intensive piece of our program, and also one of the biggest challenges we face as we have more areas to manage. And so we're using a bunch of inputs, a really cool modeling project that's being done and going to be wrapped up in the next couple months, and really trying to figure out how can we continue our culling program to be most effective, and how do we prioritize. We're looking at whether there's triggers or levels of disease where culling doesn't make sense anymore. And, so we're going to have some hard decisions down the road, but that's what we're working on. And then as a counterpart to that conversation, Jason's been doing a lot of homework thinking about harvest management as our other possible tool. We already have been utilizing hunters and harvest management, but as we move down the road, are there additional season portions we should be considering, increased bag limits, different methods, ways to incentivize hunters to harvest more deer. And so that's going to be a really important part of this conversation going forward. So how is this all going to happen? As I said, Jason and I are really deep into the homework and the planning and the talking to staff. We will, by June 13th, have a draft revised plan for administration to review. The month of July is going to be our stakeholder input. We just met with our public engagement coordinator and have a plan to reach out to hunters and the public to get their important input. By September 12th, we're planning on having the final plan to administration. It'll go to the regulations committee this coming October, along with the 2023 deer season dates and any proposed amendments that will come from the revision of this plan. And then finally, December 2nd, we'll be back in front of you all and present the results of this endeavor to revise the plan as well as any proposed changes. With that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Director Nicole, and deputies. It's a pleasure to be here and certainly appreciate this opportunity. I want to start the same way Jasmine did, just with a big thank you. I'm up here presenting these recommendations, but it's a work of a lot of people to get us where we are. So particularly want to thank my staff, Aaron Hildreth and Kevin Wiskirkin, our deer program assistants, Ashley Rhea and Sarah Cope, certainly Jasmine and all of her team, members of the Deer Task Force, and then the rest of the folks in the agency. There aren't very many staff in this agency that at one point or time during the year aren't involved in some sort of deer management disease surveillance. It really is a team effort. and certainly want to thank all of our partners as well. So this presentation, I'm going to start out really briefly with an overview of last year's deer season, and we'll transition right into the recommendations for this fall. And so the first slide just presents some of the information that we use to help make our decisions. So we've got a suite of biological data and a suite of social data that we use to help formulate these recommendations. And so we obviously have harvest estimates that we get from hunters as they telecheck their deer. We can get a sense of what the age structure is of the harvest from telecheck as well. We have a population model that we can use to estimate abundance. We have a variety of indices that we can use as well to get a handle on trends in our deer population. Jasmine talked in great detail about our disease surveillance and monitoring efforts. But that social component is equally important. And we reach out to and send surveys to thousands of firearms deer hunters every year, thousands of archery deer hunters every year. We work with the USDA to send surveys to thousands of agricultural producers throughout the state to get their opinions about deer numbers in the areas that they operate in. We have also a variety of stakeholder input, certainly a lot of MDC staff input, and then all this information gets compiled to develop our recommendations, which go through our MDC Deer Task Force before it goes to the Regulations Committee and then on to the Commission. So we had a good deer season last year. We ended up harvesting just over 295,000 deer. It was very close to the mark that we'd set in 2020. We were up during the November portion, which is when most of the deer are harvested. We had great weather on opening weekend, much better than it was in 2020. So jumped out to an early lead there and had a strong November portion. We were down in the rest of the portions. It was an interesting fall. It was kind of a warm start to the fall, and then December was one of the warmest Decembers on record. So it really was kind of challenging conditions outside of the sweet spot of the season there in November. But all in all, a good season and among the highest on record for us. So I wanted to just display this graph. This shows statewide deer harvest just to give you a sense of where we've been through time. Our peak year was 2006. At that point in time, we had deer numbers that were above our objectives in a lot of central Missouri and a lot of North Missouri counties. And so we had liberalized antlerless harvest opportunities in a lot of counties. We're trying to reduce deer populations in those parts of the state, and we're successful at that, as you can see the declining trend in harvest. We had a very severe outbreak of hemorrhagic disease in 2012 that really took its toll on deer numbers, and you can see the significant drop in harvest in 2013 as a result of that disease outbreak. We responded by becoming more conservative with our antlerless harvest opportunities, and as you can see, the population has responded and has recovered from that outbreak in just about all portions of the state, with the exception of a few counties in extreme northwest Missouri. So we look at the composition of the deer harvest. We've got antlered bucks in blue, does in green, and button bucks in red. You can see a few distinct periods here. If we look at the mid-'80s through the early 2000s, we were harvesting about as many does as we were antlered bucks. We got into that period that I mentioned earlier in the early to mid-2000s where we were trying to increase antlerless harvest pretty significantly, and there was a good period of time there where we were harvesting more does than we were antlered bucks. Then the HD outbreak came in 2012. We had to become more conservative with antlerless harvest opportunities to allow that population to recover, and as I mentioned, that has taken place. We set a new antlered buck harvest record last year of just over 143,000. Continue to see increasing trend in antlerless buck harvest that we attribute to an increasing deer population, removing the antler point restriction in a number of counties in terms of our response to CWD, and also just a general shift in hunter preference through time as more folks are just more geared towards an interest of harvesting antlered deer. If we look at the status of our deer population, the beige color that you're seeing is where we would classify the deer population as about right, and that's based on the input that we get from our stakeholders in terms of the opinions of our hunters and the opinions of our agricultural producers and the rest of our constituents. And so we're in a pretty good spot in terms of where we sit. The vast majority of our counties we would classify as we have about the right number of deer. We have a few counties in the cooler colors of an extreme northwest and extreme southeast where we're below objective, and we have a handful of counties where we have what we classify as about right too many deer. But by and large, for most of the state, we're at a pretty good spot in terms of deer abundance. But we do know that we have increasing deer populations. So if you look at the red counties, those are increasing. The orange are stable to increasing. We have a handful that are stable. So we're at a good point in time in terms of deer abundance, but with these increasing numbers, our goal now and has been the last several years is to gradually increase antlerless harvest opportunities to try to stabilize the population. So recommendations for this year, the first recommendation is to add a firearms antlerless permit in Iron County. Iron is one of the few counties of the state that does not afford hunters the opportunity to fill a firearms antlerless permit. Deer numbers in Iron County, like most of the southern part of the state, have been increasing for some time now and at a pretty good rate. And our hunter surveys have showed that the deer population's finally gotten to a level where the hunters are satisfied. And so we feel it's appropriate to add a firearms antlerless permit there to help slow that population growth rate and attempt to stabilize that deer population in that part of the state. Our next recommendation is to increase the firearms antlerless permits from 1 to 2 in the 18 counties that you see here starred on the map, and those being Bates, Buchanan, Caldwell, Clinton, DeKalb, Dent, Douglas, Gentry, Henry, Jasper, Madison, Marys, Phelps, and Platte, the portion that's on the northern portion of the county outside of the Kansas City urban zone, Ray, Shannon, Texas, and Vernon counties. If we look at these, if we go first to the northwest, as I mentioned earlier, the early to mid-2000s, we had overabundant deer populations in these counties. We were able to bring them down with increased antlerless harvest opportunity, and then I mentioned the HD outbreak that really hit the population hard. Since then, the population has recovered. Deer numbers are increasing in all those counties, and our hunters are getting to the point now where they're satisfied with deer numbers again, and so this will help to slow the population growth rate. Generally the same story in the counties here in the red circle. They were hit very hard by the HD outbreak in 12, but have recovered nicely and feel that we can add the additional hunting opportunity for our hunters and also increase antlerless harvest to help to stabilize these increasing populations. And if we shift further east, a bit of a different story for these counties. These counties have had slowly growing deer numbers for many decades now, and are getting to the point in recent years where hunters are telling us that they're satisfied with deer numbers. And so we've gradually been increasing antlerless harvest opportunities to try to slow the growth rate of the population and stabilize numbers in this part of the state as well. Our third recommendation is to add the 4 starred counties to the CWD management zone, those being Barton, Greene, Ripley, and Vernon. And Jasmine talked a bit about the justification for this recommendation. We had the CWD positive just across our border in Kansas that was within 10 miles of Barton and Vernon counties. Also had a positive in Christian County that was within 10 miles of Greene, and then the positive in Northeast Arkansas that was within 10 miles of Ripley. And so as our standard practice, as Jasmine mentioned, any county that's within 10 miles of a CWD positive, we would recommend adding to our CWD management zone. So this would bring us to 38 counties, and as a reminder, would trigger a feeding and mineral supplementation ban, and also the carcass transport regulations would take effect as well. Our fourth recommendation that Jasmine had alluded to was recommending that we conduct mandatory sampling in a subset of the 38 counties. So we conducted mandatory sampling last year in 34 counties. Very labor intensive in terms of the staff resource to conduct an effort like that. And so with additional 4 counties, we were faced with the difficult decision of having to prioritize, recognizing that to sample in 38 counties would just exceed the capacity that we have. And so we're recommending that mandatory sampling occur on opening weekend of the November portion in the Orange counties and not occur in Knox, Gasconade, Warren, and St. Charles, even though those are in the zone. In terms of how we made that decision, Jasmine did the lion's share of the work for this, did a great job of looking at a number of risk factors that we had to evaluate. So for all 38 counties, looked at for the ones that have had a positive detection, how many positives did they have, how many years have we had detections in those counties, when was the last detection, what is the total number of sections that have a positive as a proxy to disease spread, and then what is the surveillance history of those in terms of a mandatory sampling within the zone. For the counties that we didn't have a positive detection, we looked at how close was the nearest positive, and also what are the characteristics of those nearest positives. We assumed that any new county to the management zone that didn't have the intensive surveillance history of those that have been in before would be at the highest risk, and so we certainly wanted to include those new counties. And so we deemed that the 4 counties in gray would be the lowest risk, and so our recommendation is to conduct mandatory sampling, as I said, in the other 34 counties. Our fifth recommendation is to expand our DMAP, or Deer Management Assistance Program, statewide. This is a program we started a few years ago. It provides additional firearms antlerless permits, DMAP permits, to qualifying landowners that are not able to meet their deer management objectives with the county level number permits. And so if they meet the acreage requirement, whether it be a damage situation where they're having damage to their crops, or whether it's a quality deer management objective where they want to balance their buck to doe ratio, increase harvest of antlerless deer, it's a program that's been well received where it's been implemented, and we've done it in a gradual gradual expansion through time. So we started in 19, and it's just 7 counties. We expanded that in 2020 to other parts of the state, and then last year, the map you're seeing here is what it looked like in last year's deer season, and our proposal this year is to fill in the gaps and have this program be available statewide. Last year, just to throw some numbers out, had 86,000 acres that were enrolled in the program. Kevin Wiskirkin, my staff member that runs this program, has done a really great job of being in tune with how participating landowners feel about the program. So he sends a survey to all of those folks after the deer season to find out if we've hit the mark. And I think we've done a great job, and I think the numbers attest to that. 98% of the landowners that we surveyed last year felt that DMAP was an effective deer management strategy, and 95% were satisfied with the program. Our 6th recommendation is to rescind the antler point restriction in the 2-star counties, which would be Barton and Vernon, because our recommendation is to incorporate those in the CWD management zone, and Jasmine talked about why our recommendation is to rescind the APR in management zone counties, just giving those younger bucks that are afforded protection of the APR are the most likely to disperse from the area where they were born and potentially spread the disease. Our 7th recommendation is to exempt youth hunters from the antler point restriction if they're 6 to 15 years of age on the opening day of deer season. We know the antler point restriction is a very popular regulation where it's in place. It requires a deer to have 4 points on one side of its rack in order to be able to be harvested. Our surveys show that it is a popular regulation where it exists, but we know in some parts of the state the popularity just isn't there, and that's why it's not a statewide implementation. We've implemented it where hunters have told us that they want an older age structure of the buck segment of the population. It's been successful. We have data that shows that it does recruit bucks into older age classes, but we know it can be a barrier to success, especially for our young hunters that generally aren't as picky with what they harvest as our adult hunters are. And we recognize that when we implemented the antler point restriction, because during the 2 youth portions of firearms deer season, the antler point restriction doesn't apply, but it does for youth hunters throughout the rest of the deer season. And so we've seen declining deer numbers in Missouri, deer hunter numbers in Missouri for about the last decade. So we feel it's appropriate to look for ways that we can remove any barriers that we can to success, especially with these younger hunters that are going to be the next generation of hunters coming up. So we feel like we can remove that barrier. We can also feel like we can do that in the counties that have the APR without significantly affecting the age structure of the buck segment of the population. So given that about 15% of our hunters are youth hunters, we feel like we can afford them that opportunity to harvest a buck of their choosing during the entire deer season while still maintaining that older age structure of the buck segment in those counties that our hunters have come to enjoy. We surveyed our deer hunters a couple of years ago to see what they would think about this proposal, and we had more support for this change than opposition. And then another added benefit would also help to simplify regulations. And so right now, if you're a youth hunter, you have to follow the APR for all but the 2 youth portions, but not during those 2 portions, where this would simplify things in my mind to where if you're a youth hunter, if you meet this age requirement for the entire deer season, whether it's archery or any portion of the firearms deer season, APR would not apply to you. All right, 2 more proposals. The 8th proposal is for approval of amendments to our conservation deer and turkey regulations. There are a number of these each year. Of course, this year, perhaps the most significant is adding the map in the Zelma Carmichael State Forest to the regulations table to allow deer and turkey hunting this fall. It's in Butler County down in southeast Missouri. Archery methods for deer, it's only a 40-acre area, so our staff recommended archery methods for deer and archery and firearms for turkey. And then our last recommendation is approval of managed hunts. We conducted a number of managed hunts with partners all throughout the state. We have a number of new managed hunts this year, and those are indicated on the screen here. We have in Spanish Lake County Park an archery hunt. In Central Region at Reform Conservation Area in Whetstone, we have firearms, muzzleloader or firearms hunts, depending on which one of the 2 you're looking at. Lost Valley Hatchery and Charles Green and Three Creeks Waters Russell Unit and Smithville Lake all having new youth-only firearms managed hunts. And then lastly, some new firearms managed hunts on state parks. And so these aren't necessarily new hunts, but the Department of Natural Resources does deer surveys on the state parks. And whenever deer numbers are high enough, recommend having managed hunts there to bring deer numbers down to appropriate levels. And then once they get them there, the hunts are often removed, so they fluctuate and they come in and out through time. And so recommend this year new hunts at Robertsville, Crowder, Truman, Mark Twain, and Montauk. And that concludes the presentation, and Jasmine and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions? Great job, you guys. Super job.
Appreciate that.
So if I read that right on mandatory testing, these 4 counties down in the southwest part of the state are going to be tested, and those other 4 counties up north of St. Louis will not be tested?
That's correct. So all of the new counties that are coming into the zone this year would be tested. And then Warren, St. Charles, Gasconade, and Knox up in northeast or St. Louis would not.
I'm getting feedback on my mic, so I'm not going to use it. Okay, Joel. So I'm a resident of Franklin County. I've got deer hunters in my household, including our little guy who got his first deer this year, and I'm a proud mama bear about that deer. I can't walk around in my daily life without having somebody approach me at some point. So I want to thank staff for explaining everything that's going on in the department to help control CWD, because it helps inform my conversations. I understand we are going to be doing some listening sessions with landowners around the targeted culling efforts. Is that correct?
So we wrapped those up about a month ago. And so we did that in 4 different areas of the state, correct?
And I'm just really encouraged by you guys factoring in that social acceptance of the regulations that are coming through. When I look at the presentation, one county that jumped out that I empathize with a little bit would be St. Genevieve County. You know, we had a cluster of positives, but then we're also saying that they have perhaps too few deer and a stable, maybe increasing deer population. What tools are we looking at for those folks in St. Genevieve so they can continue success with deer?
Yeah, St. Genevieve is a little bit of an anomaly in that, as you pointed out, most of the counties around St. Gen, folks are generally satisfied with deer numbers, but St. Gen, our hunters are kind of split on how they perceive deer abundance. There's a fair number that perceive that there are enough deer to satisfy them, and there's about an equal percentage that perceive deer numbers are too low. So it's a challenging situation because we have pretty extensive distribution of CWD in the area, and as you saw from Jasmine's map, the rate of the number of positives that we see is certainly increasing. We had quite a few positives there last year, and so it's a difficult situation. And I think we, as we approach this, we do our best to manage the disease to the best of our abilities, just recognizing that it does impact those hunters in St. Gen, but as it continues to spread, hunters in neighboring counties as well. But we also want folks to be able to go out and enjoy deer hunting as well. And so, I think we do our best to, I guess, I'd say to balance that, recognizing that there are those two sides.
I really like this topic, obviously, and it's good. Play up for a couple hours. Just some comments, and you're going to be looking at some of the CWD management strategies coming up. The challenges that I see that you have on it is that we have an increasing group of people that want older structure, quality, trophy deer, which the way we manage CWD is complex. That's a huge challenge. The other thing that really confuses the public is we start looking at adjacent states that are known for trophy deer. I mean, I know Missouri is too, but you look at Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and there's the way that CWD is managed is just all over the board, and it becomes really confusing for the public. I look at it very seriously. You just kind of scratch your head. I talked to Mike about the policy of Kansas, and I didn't know they were testing in Kansas. It kind of shocked me when I saw that. Educating the public on why our approach is the most logical one is really helpful. Some comments. And I don't envy your position, but I know it's tough. It is really tough. We look at our CWD areas that we're trying to decrease population, and then we look at the whole map. In general, we've got an increasing population. And it's just, it's from a statistical standpoint, it's hard to get your head around. Just comments, just from the thought process. I'm glad you're doing it. The question I actually had was a little bit of explanation on the DMAC program. There were some things of that I guess was concerned. The 500-acre limitation almost feels like it's an hindrance. And then when we look at the DMAP participation, as you get closer to urban areas where the land value is higher, it's hard to put together a 500-acre parcel. When I look at that DMAP, I think of quality deer management, but really it's a population control management. little bit of explanation of how the depredation permit system really is a big difference in the DMAP, for a landowner? Because, I consider putting my property together. My client is good with depredation permit and do it on the place. Can you give me some answers?
Yeah, so our approach to DMAP was that it wasn't going to be a replacement for the depredation permits, but could augment, supplement that. So if we had folks that were typically issued depredation permits during the growing season, and now they have this tool that's available to them where they can obtain permits that they couldn't obtain before to harvest additional antlerless deer during the deer season, it'd be a nice, another option for those folks rather than realizing that if I've got to just use these depredation permits and that alone. And so again, not a replacement, but just a way to offer another opportunity. In terms of how that process works, it's very similar in that the agents are involved. Whether it's a depredation permit or DMAP, if it's a damage related, they're going to go out there, assess the damage, and then recommend to us the appropriate number of permits for that particular property. In terms of the acreage requirement, that was a tough decision. If you look across the country, there are a range of minimum acreage requirements to get into DMAP. There are some that are more restrictive than us, and there are some that are where you don't have to have quite as many acres. And our 500-acre minimum, it is 40 acres within a municipality, so that does offer the smaller acreage within closer proximity to higher human population densities. But the 500 acres was kind of in that sweet spot where we felt it was enough land brought together to have a meaningful impact on the deer density. And so as we considered what acreage size that was, if we go with a much smaller acreage size, it could be a situation where we continue to give DMAP permits every year, but if a property is too small and the deer are just coming in from neighboring properties, it becomes this perpetual cycle and doesn't really address the issue. And so if we get enough properties together, and we felt that 500 acres, if we issued the DMAP permits, it would help achieve that objective, whether it's damage related or whether more recreational, where they wanted to balance the buck to doe ratio. But it is a comment we get quite a bit in terms of the acreage requirement. And so, our thoughts are if we roll this out statewide in 2022, that's going to give us an idea of what kind of new demand and workload that we have to administer the program. And then if we, continue to evaluate the success of the program and the feedback we get from hunters, and we continue to hear that and evaluate that and think that there's some lower threshold that can still meet the objectives but be more inclusive, then it's certainly something that we consider.
So just a couple additional comments. A good friend of mine owns a place up in Plainfield that's got 140 acres, and that's on a small acreage around it. He has a bunch of food plots and stuff, and his deer population is completely gone crazy because the little acreage nobody hunts, and then he can't have a food plot to manage deer, but I don't qualify for PPM, and so that's one of the challenges. And the other thing with the DMAP program, for me, I try to raise quality deer on my farm, and I still have to follow the same season, for the permits, if I understand it correctly. I can't be taking 20 does and still trying to kill one time sure buck. It won't work. And so that's one reason I don't participate. It doesn't let me, I can go outside. Now, the expansion of the antlerless in December is huge. Then I do have those are some challenges, to just look at and consider. I'm sure you're very, very comfortable.
Appreciate the comments.
Can I share one really quick comment? I know we're short on time, but since we had comments about CWD communication, the complexity of it, and importance of social component, I just wanted to mention that we work really close with our communications team, and it has been a hot topic. How do we improve communication? And so we are making small increments towards a more strategic communication approach. And last fall did an email survey specific to communication efforts, and it was kind of a pilot hoping to move forward to really look at how are we doing on communications and how can we improve it. So that's going to also, I didn't mention in the presentation, but also will be a big focus moving forward is how do we communicate better. So just wanted to mention that.
Had you referenced at all the survey that will be conducted as part of the focus group? I may mention that in response to Commissioner Ackerkamp, your comment earlier about the focus group with landowners for CWD. As part of that that project, also want to mention too, we'll be sending a survey early fall that'll go to landowners throughout all of the CWD core areas in the state. The focus groups helped us design the questions, and so we'll be reaching out to all those landowners in those core areas to understand some of the barriers and motivations to participating in targeted culling and just general understanding and opinions about CWD2.
Well, thanks again, Jasmine and Jason. Appreciate
Thank
it
you.
very much. Yeah, good work. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, included in your packet on pages 11 to 13 are 3 orders of rulemaking that rescind the 4-point antler restriction in 2 counties and for all youth statewide, modify limits for antlerless deer, and expand the Deer Management Assistance Program statewide. If approved, these changes will be effective July 1st, 2022. The action items are as follows. 3 CSR 10-7.435 deer special harvest provisions would rescind the antler point restriction in Barton and Vernon counties and remove the antler point restriction during all portions of deer season for youth age 15 and younger. 7.437 antlerless deer hunting permit availability would increase availability of firearms antlerless permits in Iron County from 0 to 1 and increase availability of firearms antlerless permits in Bates, Buchanan, Caldwell, Clinton, DeKalb, Dent, Douglas, Gentry, Henry, Jasper, Madison, Marys, Phelps, Platte, the portions outside of the Kansas City urban zone, Ray, Shannon, Texas, and Vernon counties from 1 to 2. The final order of rulemaking for 7.600 Deer Management Assistance Program expands the Deer Management Assistance Program statewide. Mr. Chairman, I request Commission approval of these action items as described.
That motion, please. So moved. And a second. Further discussion?
Just have one question for you. On the removing the antler restriction, you don't really use, because that's been applied to direct firearms, right?
Correct.
I just wonder what your thoughts are as far as the use from an enforcement standpoint. I mean, it looks like a way to basically remove the antler restriction. And the reason I ask that question, you and I talked about, people talk about the 4-point restriction, so the minute you remove it, they hammer the deer.
Yep.
I just wonder if we're kind of indirectly not removing it.
We had a pretty good discussion about that in our Regulations Committee meeting because we were concerned about how enforcement viewed that. Our enforcement chief, Mr. Doman, and his team had looked at this and thought about the pros and the cons extensively and recognized, in their words, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, that we're always going to have people who are not going to follow the rules, and there will be some violations there, but there will also be a lot of really good opportunities for our young sportsmen and women to take advantage of harvesting any deer that they come across while they're hunting. And that probably far outweighs the negative issues associated with those people who are not so scrupulous and would take advantage of this as a loophole. And they said basically it will be up to them to catch some of those folks, but in the big picture, it's probably a very positive step for recruiting hunters and introducing young hunters to the sport.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Let's take a short break, please, 10 minutes. Be back at 10 till.
the CWD management zone. We're recommending Greene County enter the CWD management zone due to the proximity of the CWD detection in Christian County. Because CWD was detected in southeastern Kansas within 10 miles of Missouri, we recommend Barton and Vernon counties be added. We also recommend the addition of Ripley County due to CWD positive detection in northeastern Arkansas within 10 miles of the border. With the addition of these counties, the recommendation presented for your approval today calls for mandatory sampling in 34 out of 38 CWD management zone counties during the opening weekend of fall firearms deer season, November 12th and 13th. Those counties are Adair, Berry, Barton, Camden, Cedar, Sheraton, Christian, Clark, Crawford, Franklin, Greene, Hickory, Howell, Jefferson, Laclede, Lynn, Macon, McDonald, Mercer, Oregon, Ozark, Perry, Polk, Pulaski, Putnam, Ripley, St. Clair, St. Francis, St. Genevieve, Stone, Sullivan, Taney, Vernon, and Washington. The 4 counties within the CWD management zone where we do not recommend this requirement are Gasconade, Knox, St. Charles, and Warren. As a reminder, the placement of grain, salt products, minerals, and other consumable, natural, and manufactured products is not allowed within the CWD management zone. I request Commission approval of recommendations to add Barton, Greene, Ripley, and Vernon County to CWD management zone and to require mandatory sampling of the deer taken in the 34 to 38 management zone counties during the first weekend of fall firearms deer season, as shown on page 19 of your packet.
Second discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Motion carries.
Commissioners, the next 2 action items for the 2022-2023 season will establish fall deer and turkey hunting regulations on conservation areas and managed hunts. Conservation area regulations table on page 21 of your packet reflect changes made to 12 areas as a result of this recommendation, including changes to allowed methods and the use of antlerless permits. The recommendations brought forward today include managed hunts held on properties owned by the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Natural Resources, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the National Park Service. As a reminder, a change was implemented last year for managed deer hunts conducted on Department of Conservation lands to remove the requirement that hunter education certification be required for hunters who are, 1, ages 11 to 15, as long as they purchase a managed deer hunting permit and hunt in immediate presence of a properly licensed adult that is hunter education certified or born before January 1st of 67, or 2, hunters age 16 or older, as long as they purchase an apprentice hunter authorization and a managed deer hunting permit and hunt in immediate presence of a properly licensed adult that is hunter education certified on or before January 1st of 67. MDC partners that conduct managed hunts on their lands retain the option of requiring managed hunt participants to be hunter education certified. A summary of recommended changes to managed hunts is provided in your packet, beginning on page 22. Mr. Chairman, I request Commission approval of these action items as described.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same.
Thank you. The last set of action items are proposed amendments to correct a conflict to allowed methods for hunting other wildlife where the antlerless portion of the firearms deer season and the firearms portion of the elk season overlap. Currently, this only occurs in Shannon County. If approved today, these proposals will be filed with the Secretary of State, open for formal comment period from July 2nd through July 31st. Comments received will be compiled and presented as part of formal orders of rulemaking for Commission consideration at your meeting in September. The anticipated effective date of these changes is November 30th of 2022. Due to the extension of the antlerless portion of the firearms deer season last year, these changes are necessary to allow hunters to pursue deer using all legal methods during the antlerless portion of the deer season when the antlerless portion overlaps with the elk firearms season. A similar change is needed to allow elk hunters to use all legal methods to hunt elk during the firearms elk season in counties that allow elk hunting and which are also open during the antlerless portion of the firearms deer season. Mr. Chairman, I request approval of 3 CSR 10-7.433 deer firearms hunting seasons and 10-7.705 elk hunting seasons as described.
Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Commissioners, a summary of all citizen comments received since my last Regulations Committee report may be found in my formal report beginning on page 2. Upcoming meetings of the Regulation Committee are scheduled for July 7th, which will be mid-year code review, and August 11th, if needed, to continue the mid-year code review, and October 27th of 2022. Mr. Chairman, unless you or members of the Commission have questions, this concludes my Regulations Committee report. Well, at this time, then, I'd like to introduce wild turkey biologist Raina Tile, who is here to talk about a new turkey habitat initiative. Raina holds a Bachelor's of Science in Wildlife and Fisheries from Ohio State Universities and a Master's in Wildlife and Fisheries Resources from West Virginia University. Her master's work focused on turkey population ecology in northeastern South Dakota and the South Dakota, where she worked very closely with the public, private landowners, and the South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks. Raina's knowledge of turkey population dynamics, strong organizational skills, and proficiency in data analysis make her extremely qualified to lead our wild turkey program. Unfortunately for our agency, Ms. Tile is going to be leaving us in the middle of next month, and we will miss her greatly. But we will take advantage of her knowledge while she's here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Raina.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Director, Deputy Directors. Thank you for having me today here to talk about a new wild turkey habitat initiative that we've developed. I'll talk about, the purpose for this initiative and then also kind of generally what we expect this initiative to entail. So as many of us here are all aware, we've recently been experiencing some declines in our eastern wild turkey population here in Missouri, and similar declines are being experienced in our surrounding states and in many states across the range of the eastern turkey. A recently completed study just a couple of years ago found that we had several reproductive rates that were lower now than when a similar study was conducted several decades ago in the 1980s, while our survival rates remained high and our harvest rates remained sustainable. So that pointed out to us that that reproductive part of the equation is really what has changed the most over the last several decades. In addition to that, we conduct a summer brood survey every year, and the poult-to-hen ratios from that survey and index for production have been experiencing a long-term declining trend now over several decades. And recently we've had several years in a row of what we would consider relatively poor production, poult-to-hen ratios around 1.0 or lower. And so by looking at all of this information, it's really stressed that reproduction or that production side of the equation is primarily what's been driving the declines that we've been seeing in turkey abundance. Now, we did, some work to figure out what our current status is, what our current turkey vital rates are, as far as what our population is experiencing in this post-restoration era. But that research really didn't, figure out what are the factors that are influencing that. So we tried to look at things that have changed over the last several decades that could be contributing to that poor productivity. We've been seeing a loss of the quality nesting and brood rearing habitats across the Missouri landscape. We've been experiencing wetter than normal springs for the last about 15 years or so. We've been seeing increasing populations of some nest and poult predator species, not just on the mammalian side of things, but on the avian side of the predator spectrum as well. And potentially are seeing fewer arthropods out there, fewer insects, which is an important food source for our young poults. And so really, we talk about this reproduction or this production side of the equation being what's driving what we're seeing. And when we look at the reproductive rates that we saw during that most recent study and we compare it to what we saw during the 1980s, poult survival is really the one that jumps out as being the most different. Over on the far right of that graph, the poult survival that we found on average during that study was about half of what the poult survival metric was during the 1980s, and that's basically the proportion of poults that are surviving their first 4 weeks after hatching. And so because of that, we and other biologists believe that brood-rearing habitat especially is probably a limiting factor right now. And so improving brood-rearing habitat, not just the quality of existing habitat, but the quantity and the amount of good brood-rearing habitat on the landscape, has the greatest potential to see realized increases in turkey production, which will translate to increases in turkey abundance. And so throughout this presentation, when I talk about quality turkey habitat, assessing turkey habitat, really what we're talking about is brood-rearing habitat, because that seems to be the piece of the equation that's most limiting for our turkey population right now. And so we developed this wild turkey habitat initiative that's two parts. The first part being an education and outreach component, the second part being a turkey habitat evaluation and implementing some new habitat management. The objectives of that first education and outreach piece is really to increase understanding of the characteristics of quality turkey habitat, particularly brood-rearing habitat, among our internal staff, but also the public. So just trying to get a good understanding out there, increase understanding of what we're talking about when we say brood-rearing habitat, because that can be really vague. We also want to, increase understanding of how people, our staff and the public, can incorporate brood-rearing habitat management into their land management activities. In addition to that, in order for us to figure out how to get more brood-rearing habitat on the landscape and how to improve our management, we need to see where we're at right now. And so the second part of this initiative is going to be conducting a turkey habitat evaluation on our lands to figure out where we currently provide quality habitat and also identify areas where we can improve our management in order to improve the quality of the habitat within our areas, and then incorporate recommendations for improved management into our planning and our staff work plans. So first I'll talk about that education and outreach component. Again, that includes both some internal education and some external outreach and education. And then I'll get into the overview of the design of that turkey habitat evaluation and implementation process. So as far as internal education and outreach, the big foundational piece for this initiative will be developing this quality turkey habitat synopsis document. Essentially, this document will be a scientific document outlining and defining what we mean when we say quality turkey habitat, when we say quality brood-rearing habitat. We'll discuss different habitat types that provide benefits to turkeys throughout the year and across Missouri's diverse landscape. So, what does quality brood-rearing habitat look like up in North Missouri? What does it look like in our core Ozark forested areas down in southern Missouri? We'll use all of the best information that we currently have, so peer-reviewed publications, subject matter experts, ongoing research, and input from our partner organizations in order to build this document and really put together an informative piece, again, which will be the foundation for which we build our staff trainings and outreach and everything on top of. So as far as staff trainings, basically we just want to incorporate the information from that document into our current staff training so that we're communicating the most up-to-date, current informative information to our staff about what quality turkey habitat looks like. As far as external outreach and education, there's really going to be three components to this. So one of which is landowner workshops, another educational videos, and then online articles and documents, and I'll discuss each of these in more detail. So we obviously have an existing suite of landowner workshops that we provide. A lot of our private land staff put these on in conjunction with partners and other folks. And so the idea behind this is to identify where we have existing workshops and where we can incorporate some of the information from that new habitat synopsis document into those workshops to, again, just improve the utility of those and make sure we're communicating the best information to our landowners. And then potentially working with interested staff within the department who might want to develop new workshops, maybe turkey habitat management focused workshops, where we can develop more of those and put those on across the state to get this information out to our landowners. We understand that not everybody will be able to attend a workshop. The amount of those that we can put on each year is kind of limited. The number of people that can attend is limited. So we thought the best way to visually communicate this information to a broader reach of folks was by using videos. So we came up with the idea to have a series of short videos which would really grab people's attention, provide them with some information about a specific topic, but not get too down into the weeds, not hopefully bore people before they get through the whole video. And so those could cover topics such as turkey habitat needs throughout the year, forest or woodland management for turkeys, open land or grassland management for turkeys, incorporating turkey habitat into working or agricultural landscapes. And then we might have a longer, more informational video that would serve more as like a virtual landowner workshop. So that could be 30 minutes or more of really detailed information, visualizing what they might learn if they came to a landowner workshop without actually having to be there because the capacity of those events is sometimes limited. So we could give tutorials of management techniques, just really give them a good visual of habitat quality and describe how we got there. And then, of course, providing this information from that turkey habitat synopsis document in a more accessible format online through articles and documents written in a more public-facing and friendly format for folks to access so that they can refer back to this information whenever they want in order to inform their habitat management on their areas. So that's really a general overview of the first part of that initiative, which is just getting everyone on the same page about what we're talking about, getting that information out to our staff, to landowners, our partners, members of the public, just so that everybody has a real understanding of what turkeys need to have on our landscape. The second part is a little bit more us focused, but also includes some partner input and stuff as well. And that is our wild turkey habitat evaluation and implementation. Again, trying to figure out where we're at with our areas so that we can really figure out where we need to go from here. Generally, this will involve identifying where we plan to do this evaluation, so identifying the scope, developing a protocol to conduct the evaluation, actually conducting the evaluation, and then based on what we find from that evaluation, developing and implementing recommendations that we can incorporate into our habitat management on our areas. So that defining the scope and extent of the evaluation, a lot of this will be outlined in more detail by a turkey habitat working group within our turkey task force, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So exactly how we do this is subject to change based on discussions with our staff, figuring out the best way to prioritize this evaluation. But the hope is that we'll develop priority turkey habitat management landscapes within Missouri. So areas that we identify are important for turkeys. Obviously, turkeys exist across the whole state. It would be a little bit of a big burden to go out and evaluate every single conservation area or area that we, or partner land that we lease or manage. So we need to kind of hone in our focus. And ultimately, we would be looking to cover the diversity of Missouri's landscape. So we'd probably have a priority zone up north in more of the agricultural area. We'd probably have a priority landscape in the Ozarks, some priority landscapes in those transitional zones between the Ozarks and the more open and agricultural landscapes, just so that we can really cover the diversity of Missouri's landscapes within this evaluation. We'd probably identify, where our existing conservation opportunity areas intersect with other important landscapes as identified by maybe other organizations in Missouri, our partner organizations, and within those we'd identify conservation areas and prioritize those conservation areas for evaluation. Again, we would need to develop some sort of protocol to actually go out and assess what the habitat is. And so this could include some quantitative surveys where we're actually looking at the amount of open ground cover intermixed with vegetation, a little bit more scientific, but we would probably also have qualitative descriptions of what the land cover looks like. We have been looking at some documents that already exist, some NRCS evaluations and things that we might be able to pull from in order to design this. Again, this evaluation process will be designed by that working group. So what this actually ends up looking like is subject to change based on those discussions. And then the third step is going out and conducting that evaluation, looking at where we have quality brood-rearing habitat as a proportion of usable space for turkeys on our conservation areas, identify where management changes can easily and positively impact the habitat on our conservation areas, and then ultimately developing management recommendations that will help lead to a better future condition of habitat on our areas for turkeys. And so ultimately, we would hope to revise some of our management plans and incorporate these habitat management targets into work plans and various things. And so that's another reason why we have a group of diverse staff helping to build this, because we want to make sure that what we come up with is actually able to be implemented by our staff and their capacity. And so as far as immediate next steps, I actually met with the Wild Turkey Task Force on Wednesday of this week, where we discussed this initiative, and we started talking about that turkey habitat working group and what the structure of that group might look like, trying to maybe identify some folks who would be really good to serve on that. And so the development of that wild turkey habitat working group is the most immediate next step, because those folks are really who is going to drive this process. The next step beyond that is engaging with our partner organizations. As we've talked about a lot in the last couple of days here, incorporating, and involving our partners is really how we are successful in these efforts. We manage a small portion of the land area of the state. Our partners have other lands that they manage, and then landowner cooperatives and the public obviously cover the rest of that. And so involving our strategic partners, involving landowner cooperatives, including them in this effort so they can help design our evaluation, help design just the whole process of this will really help make sure that this effort is successful, because it's going to take all of us working together to really impact turkeys on a large scale. So again, I just wanted to summarize really quickly that this initiative is two parts. First part, getting everyone on the same page, getting some really good guidelines for turkey habitat management laid out in a document, involving that in our staff trainings, incorporating that into our outreach efforts, and the second part being evaluating where we are at and implementing or using the results of that evaluation to improve habitat management for turkeys on our areas and beyond. So with that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Questions, commissioners?
Steve's looking right.
Steve, I know you have some.
Well, I'm really excited about this, obviously. And from
A bunch of different reasons. I mean, I always feel as a commissioner, I'm a representative of the public, and of course we got another fine packet of a bunch of stuff today, and seeing this, that we're making responses, it's
Yes.
exciting. It's been a lot of time on it. Do we have a timeline for implementation of this?
We did have a general timeline that involved really building that habitat synopsis document over the summer months, and then developing more of the communication and outreach over the winter. But that timeline might vary because of my departure. But
I know with you leaving, that puts you on the spot, so I'm actually putting Mike on the spot indirectly.
But yeah, so we'll probably have to review that timeline, especially once that turkey habitat management group is developed. It'll really be up to them to kind of hash out when we expect we can accomplish all of these things over the next couple of years. Really hoping that we were talking about developing program objectives for FY24, so we were thinking by that point we might hopefully have something in place to start that habitat evaluation during that fiscal year. But again, it just might depend on how long it takes to build some of these foundational documents like that habitat synopsis document. We want to make sure that that's a quality foundation, because obviously everything else in this effort is built up off of that.
Well, this is kind of a generic question on the same line, and I don't ever get on Facebook, so my wife every now and then, but it's funny, I had one of my friends call me, he said, well, there's a link on Facebook to contact your commissioner regarding wild turkey population. He thought, well, I'll just call you instead. I was like, great. But anyway, as we're educating the public, that we do have initiatives, I mean, what would anybody think about maybe putting something in the Missouri Conservationists that people see that we're really attentive to this? I think it'd be really valuable, because you can get to a lot of people really quick on that.
I can speak to that a little bit. So I've been working with our conservationist staff and one of our private landowners to write an article about turkey habitat successes on private lands. So we actually visited a landowner property where they've been conducting a lot of habitat management for turkeys, specifically looking at that early successional broodering habitat. We took some pictures for that, kind of learned about what they've been doing and what they've seen in response. And we're developing an article that will be in, I believe, in a 2023 Missouri Conservationist article. So that will be a really good informational piece to help paint that picture of
I'd just
how-
like to see us be proactive on this and educating the public rather than, evidently you're the one that gets the response, the majority of these letters, according to Mike, he just puts his name on it, so, but it'd just be nice to be ahead of it.
Understood, yeah.
The other question I have, and it's kind of a little bit off topic, but one of the things I've heard from a lot of hunters this year is that, particularly in southern Missouri, it seems like public lands get really targeted by non-residents. I mean, and I'm fortunate enough to have private land, but not everybody does. I mean, any thoughts on that in the department? I mean, I know it's kind of a sticky wicket to get through, but evidently that's really, Arkansas hunters really target, Mark Twain National Forest and Southern, and I had no idea, but hearing it from my friends that it's pretty frustrating. It'd be like 8-to-1 a non-resident to a resident hunting. It's pretty amazing. I'm just curious what people thought about that.
Well, and also, I'll just add to that question while we're mentioning it, has there been a change in the amount of out-of-state hunting activity?
So that's something that we've started looking at recently. I had some of our database folks pull out some information for us about the proportion of birds taken on public and private lands over the last several seasons and seeing if there's any detectable change. I'd like to break that down to a county level because obviously some counties might see a change in that compared to other counties. I do not have that information yet, unfortunately, but I have heard from folks that believe, that pressure has been increasing on those public areas recently. So that might be something that we look at with our postseason hunter surveys, seeing where those non-resident hunters are targeting their efforts to see if there's been a change in that over the last several years. Because we do ask, where people hunt most or what counties they've hunted in, and we can break those break those up based on permit types. So that's something that we can look into to see if that pattern does hold true. And then, I don't know, if so.
Well, just to kind of add to that, on that topic is, some states actually do differentiate, like state-owned lands, they only allow residents to hunt on those. I mean, Mark Twain National Forest is a different deal,
Right.
but I mean, we have a lot of, our own properties that we manage. I don't know, it's just, it's a criticism I've heard, and it just makes you think.
Yeah.
Do you remember the number of non-resident turkey hunters in Missouri?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
That was my next question. With
I want to
increase
say
I do know.
out-of-state licenses.
9 to 10,000 non-resident turkey hunters in our state every year. And of course, they often hunt public ground. And then of course those non-residents who live in states that border us often hunt the public ground closest to their borders. So you see pretty large number of non-resident deer and turkey hunters, out of Arkansas on our southern border, and then from up north, our northern counties and public areas up there will be heavily inundated during deer and turkey season by non-residents. What proportion of those non-residents are coming back to Missouri to hunt and moved out of state? I couldn't tell you that off the top of my head. So there's those kind of things too, that people just changed locations where they live, but they come back to our state. We have a lot to offer. Residents have very high success rates here in Missouri. I would have a hard time, given our populations, looking at ways to discriminate basically against non-residents until we really felt that they were not, or our residents were being pushed out of places to.
Well, and of course, we've had many discussions on this, but 3 of the adjacent states highly discriminate against non-residents coming into theirs, and it is frustrating.
They do, and I understand where our folks become our residents can become very concerned about the way other states treat them. But at the same time, we want everyone to enjoy the outdoors. We want to encourage increased participation in hunting and fishing related activities, and if we can balance that and allow folks from other states to come see what Missouri has to offer, The only way those things are gonna change is if their residents ever decide to make the changes. Our residents can't change the Iowa regs or Kansas regs, but we'll need that to occur internally. I don't want to see us discourage other people from enjoying what our citizens have access to every day if we can avoid it without causing our citizens to lose out on that opportunity.
And I don't have any answer to that. I would just bring it to
It's been a
everybody's
struggle
attention.
for us
'Cause
on waterfowl as well, people coming over to hunt our waterfowl areas from other states and deer hunting and turkey hunting. Those three things are where we see the biggest.
So to me, that's a tribute to the great job you guys are doing. I mean, that's something to be proud of. We've got people from all over.
I believe it is, but our residents are sometimes still very, upset that they feel like they're competing against people who they can't go compete with in their
Our
states.
hunters go to their states.
And that's where the real struggle is that those other states make it very difficult for our hunters to go participate in that on their areas.
Thank you.
Rena, you did a good job.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Any other
and
questions?
Thanks for your service to the department.
Thank
Wish
you.
the best in your next chapter of your career.
Thank you very much. All right, thanks, Nick.
Any other questions?
Anything?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Jennifer Warren Batson, talk real estate.
Actually, I think I get to talk about financials first.
Okay, you get to do that.
Yeah, I do get to. Normally you would have Andrew Bond here to share the financial updates, but I don't think Andrew would mind my saying, because I think he's very proud about the fact that he has the opportunity to go visit his daughter who's about to graduate law school. So we were proud for Andrew, and I know Andrew was very proud too. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I am presenting on Andrew's behalf today item 5 on your agenda, the fiscal year 2022 financial review and summary report through April of 2022. The report has been provided to you in your advanced materials. To begin, please direct your attention to the revenue variances. Total revenues through April 2022 were 11.5% higher than last fiscal year through April 2021 and 0.8% above expectations for this point in the fiscal year. Conservation sales tax receipts were 12.8% above the first 10 months in fiscal year 21 and in line with expectations for this point in this current fiscal year. Permit revenues were 1.4% lower for the first 10 months of fiscal year 22 compared to fiscal year 21 and 1.7% above expectations. The number of our monetary hunting and fishing permits sold in fiscal year 22 through April 2022 were 84,976 lower than the previous year. We're attributing that to some of the challenges we've had with the weather this spring. Electronic permit sales, interestingly enough, have increased 5.9% compared to the first 10 months in fiscal year 21, while traditional forms of purchases, either through a vendor or over the phone, have decreased 11.1%. Federal reimbursements were 32.7% higher than this time last year and 3.7% above expectations. Other revenue sources for the first 10 months of fiscal year 22 were 3% lower than this point last fiscal year and 4.7% below expectations. Other sources of revenue through April were 3% lower than fiscal year 21, mainly due to the fiscal year 21 FEMA-SEMA reimbursements on the declared disasters that we sought reimbursement for. Next, I'll turn your attention to the expenditure variances. Total operating expenditures for the first 10 months of fiscal year 22 were 7.1% higher than fiscal year 21 through April and 5% below expectations. Operating expenditures include personal services, expense, and equipment purchases. Personal service disbursements were 5.4% higher than previous fiscal year and 4.1% below expectations through April 2022. And as you've heard several times through our meetings the last 2 days, it's probably a direct result of the vacancies that we're working through with our HR staff. Expenses were 19.1% higher than this point in the last fiscal year and 5.5% below expectations. Expenses including in-state travel, services, and supplies, along with the cost of fuel, are partly responsible for the variance from fiscal year 21, when pandemic restrictions slowed our travel-related costs and fuel costs were lower. In addition, as I'm sure you are aware, fuel prices have been increasing, causing increased expenses, and will continue to monitor our fuel expenditures and its impact to the remaining part of this fiscal year budget. Equipment disbursements were 21.9% lower than the first 10 months of fiscal year 21 and 10.8% below expectation. The variance in expenditures is primarily due in part to the final payment for the replacement helicopter that we made in July of the first month of this fiscal year. In addition, we have experienced delays in acquisition of several pieces of heavy equipment due mainly to manufacturing and supply chain issues. Capital disbursements were 21.7% lower than the previous fiscal year through April and 50.8% below the mid-year budget amount at this point in this fiscal year. Capital expenditures include land conservation and partnerships and construction. Some larger construction projects like Fountain Grove have started. However, key vacancies on the contracting team have delayed advertisement of other projects that we thought we'd have initiated by this time, and we have supply chain disruptions for some of the larger projects that we actually have under contract. Also, not just the department experiencing labor shortages, but certainly in the construction arena, we're seeing a shortage of skilled labor as well that impacts our construction contracting partners' ability to be able to deliver on work. We've also had some delays in some key acquisitions, and many of those will be forwarded to next fiscal year, so we're hoping to see some better movement on the land acquisition front in fiscal year 23. Total disbursements for the first 10 months of fiscal year 22 were 4.3% higher than the first 10 months of fiscal year 21 and 10.9% below expectations. This concludes my remarks on the fiscal year 22 financial summary through April of 2022, and I'd be happy to address any questions the commission members have.
Questions?
Very good. With that, then I would move to the next agenda item, which is an action item. And it is recommendation for the fiscal year 2023 internal expenditure plan approval. Commission approval of the Conservation Commission Fund for fiscal year 2023 internal expenditure plan with planned spending of $275,611,259. The operating budget request without Recovering America's Wildlife Act totals $222,453,174 for personal service, expense, and equipment. The capital improvement request is $38,875,000 for construction and land conservation and partnerships. The portion of the capital improvement request for new construction and land conservation and partnerships totaling that $22,258,000 are budgeted utilizing revenues for fiscal years prior to fiscal year 23. The operating and capital improvement budget request for RAWA totals $14,283,085 for personal service, expense, equipment, and land conservation and partnerships. Adjustments to estimated receipts and disbursements will be reported to the Commission at mid-year. A report of actual receipts and disbursements compared to estimates will be reported at fiscal year end. And Mr. Chairman, I present all of that in the form of an action item.
Okay,
Motion to approve.
second,
Second.
any discussion?
Just good work on the budget. You, Andrew, and the team put it all together, and thanks for taking care of business, and we look forward to next fiscal year.
And I sincerely appreciate that note of appreciation because building our budget is definitely a department-wide effort. Each branch has budget coordinators that really do have to work their tails off pretty much from November through the end of February. And then what our budget staff manages between the 1st of January and getting to this point is really quite a lot of work. So thank you for that acknowledgement. I appreciate it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Jacob.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
Commissioners, Director Pauly. I'm going to share highlights of the major construction project status report that's in your advanced materials. All right. So if you turn your attention to the first page of the report, on line 5 and Four Rivers Conservation Area and line 6, also Four Rivers Conservation Area, I'm happy to report that that contract has been signed and notice to proceed was issued on April 25th. On line 8 at Young Conservation Area, that property demolition, the bids were opened on May 5th. They were very favorable, so we are proceeding with executing that contract. And then on line 19, under the rehabilitations category at Platte Falls Conservation Area, that tower replacement, that project is complete. On the next page, on line 4, Bilby Ranch Lake Conservation Area, the parking lot accessibility improvements, that design is complete and it is in the queue for bidding. On the next line, on line 5 at Ray County Community Lake, the parking lot accessibility improvements, we have decided to implement that project with regional infrastructure maintenance staff from the Northwest region. So we have given them notice to proceed, and we're working with our inspection staff and our construction administration staff to get that project implemented using department staff. On line 6 at the Lebanon Forestry Office, those parking lot improvements. Contractor is about 50% complete. They're a little bit behind, and that's really because of the wet spring we've had. It's been very difficult for them to get the site dried out so that they can complete their paving work. And then on line 13 at the St. Louis Urban Office, the renovation project there, it's 15% complete. We did have about a month delay on that project due to some unexpected asbestos-containing materials in the flooring. And since we're working through the city for permitting purposes, we need to wait for a response from them. And then the cabinet supplier on that project, they actually lost their lease, and so they're going out of business. So there's a delay in getting a new cabinet supplier on that project. The contractor is confident that they found another cabinet supplier, and then we'll work through completing the project very close to the original schedule. On line 15, here at the Discovery Center, the entrance canopy replacement, as I've reported previously, that design is complete. We are currently working through the permitting process with the City of Kansas City. It is taking a little bit longer than we had originally anticipated, so there is a slight delay there. And then on line 20, at Black Island Conservation Area, I'm happy to report that design is complete, and the bid opening is scheduled for June 9th, so we are currently in the advertising period for that project. On line 21 at Shell Osage Conservation Area, the pump station development, Ducks Unlimited, is designing that project. The last report I had, I expect to have the plans for that pump station for final review at the end of this month, and then we'll be able to start advertisement later this summer for that project. And then on line 22 at Perry Conservation Area, the lead recycling project for the range, we have signed that contract, and notice to proceed was issued in April. And then on the next page of your report, on line 2 at Bennett Spring Fish Hatchery, the residential housing replacement, that design is complete, and we are working through a lease negotiation process with State Parks so that we can proceed with advertising that project. And then at Honeywell Lake Conservation Area on line 3, the residential housing replacement project, that design is also complete as well, and it's in queue for bidding. So that's all the remarks I have from the report. There are a few other slides I'd like to share highlighting a few other endeavors. At Bennett Spring Fish Hatchery, the renovation project, the red line indicates where we are at in the overall project. So in April, we completed phase 1, which is the basis of design. And we went through the whole scope process, evaluated with hatchery staff and consultant design staff the various options that we had identified in the original scope of work for feasibility and cost and effectiveness for the overall objectives of the project. We did accept the report, and we have given the consultant approval to proceed with phase 2 final design, so they have just started that. If you recall from previous conversations with the commission and site visits, this graphic here depicts the various scope items that were the original concept of the project. And then there are 3 main focus areas for this renovation project. First is safety, which includes a new intake and control system for the various systems in the project at the hatchery. Next is water quality, which includes traveling screens, liquid oxygen, and drum filters for various components of the hatchery system. Third is system reliability. That includes a recirculation system, improvements to the piping systems, and that groundwater well. So if you look at the updated scope items you see here on the screen, there are a few of those items that working through the basis of design process are not recommended to go forward. And then you see that the consultant has updated their probable cost estimate for the project. And because of the significant inflationary pressures in the construction industry, as well as the tightness of the skilled labor market, the consultant is estimating right now that the cost is $25 million for this work. Another item I'd like to share with the commission is an effort that we've undertaken with our new deputy counsel to identify new ways to augment and supplement our design capacity within the organization. So we have gone through a process to request on-call professional services for consultants. And you see on the left-hand side of the screen here, this is a letter that we sent to over 1,300 consultants all across the state, requesting that they submit their qualifications in accordance with state statute. It's been very well received from the consulting industry, and there are several categories of services that we're soliciting for, both architecture, civil, structural, some electrical, mechanical, and plumbing, geotechnical, and surveying. One key component of this solicitation is that we are the first criteria that we are evaluating from consultant submittals is their efforts to grow and develop a diverse workforce. So that is a pass-fail evaluation before we go through the other evaluation criteria. It's been very well received by the consulting firms, and this models what is common practice in many public infrastructure owners' efforts throughout the nation. We did, because of the vastness of the state, we did break up the state into 4 zones for services. You'll notice that each zone that is shown on the screen here, it aligns with 2 NDC regions. So Zone 1, for example, is the Central Region and Northeast Region combined. And as we looked at the distribution of infrastructure across the state, as well as the distribution of consulting firms across the state, we felt that this was a good alignment and gave many firms across the state an opportunity to participate in our work. We also made a significant effort to digitize our forms and made them fillable forms so that they were very convenient and easy to use for all the consultants. It also will help us manage all the information that's coming in so that it's in a consistent format, which will help us expedite our review of their qualifications. All of this information is on the department's website. We worked very closely with communication staff to make sure it was all available. All the forms that we're requiring through this process are available for download for those consulting firms. As I said, we actually physically mailed 1,300 letters to consultants all across the state. And we also have worked with the American Council on Engineering Consultants, Missouri chapter, to distribute all of our information as well. So it's on their website, and then they have distributed that to their email list as well. So extensive effort there to make sure that all firms have an opportunity to participate. And then the timeline, just to close it up, The solicitation period is the month of May, and then in June, we will be evaluating all of those submittals, identifying the most qualified firms. We will select multiple firms for each design service category for each zone. So then if a firm is not able to provide services in a timely manner for a particular project we have, maybe their services don't line up well with the particular needs of the project, we will have the ability to go to other consulting firms within that zone, still on call, and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate, but that we also get the work done in a timely fashion. And then the last thing to share today, this is the Infrastructure Asset Management Dashboard. I'd just like to share my appreciation for Regional Administrator Deb Burns' comments at the beginning of the meeting today, because if you reflect upon her comments, there were many times where she was mentioning infrastructure and the services that they help deliver here in the Kansas City region. So if you look in the pie chart on the right-hand side, you'll notice that in context of replacement costs of all the infrastructure assets across the state, over 1/5 of those assets are here in the Kansas City region. So tremendous amount of investment the Commission has made over the decades in infrastructure just in the Kansas City region alone. And then the item of interest this month is on the roof sectors, and according to the data we have in the system, there are 32% of the roof sectors that are past their expected life. The replacement cost is approximately $4 million. And if we were to do nothing over the next 5 years, that would increase to 40% of those roof sectors being past their expected life. Of course, we are working to replace those roofs, but if we didn't, just to show how as time marches on, it continues to wear on the infrastructure. So that concludes my remarks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
One that I had, Jacob, has to do with the diversity. Did you get any pushback when you sent those requirements or our requirements out to vendors?
No, we have not, actually. We've actually had a very positive feedback. Of course, that the approach that we are taking, we modeled after MoDOT, and they've been doing that for quite some time. So many of the consulting firms are quite familiar with that approach.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Well, first I want to applaud you for doing the on-call. I mean, it's a good way to supplement your services, because I know you have a challenge filling your professional positions. The private sector also has some challenges, as you're probably well aware.
Yes.
Finding engineers and architects and civil engineers, and the whole list is kind of hard right now, but I think it'll help you a lot. So I do applaud you for doing that. And I know you mailed out a lot of letters, and you're getting some positive response. Are they asking any questions that are kind of unusual to you, or are they just kind of saying we're looking forward to it? Or
There are some firms who have very technical, very specific questions on the insurance requirements.
Sure.
Because of the diversity of firms that we're soliciting, there were lots of questions about if they could modify the forms, if they could expand the materials that they submit to us for our consideration. So then there are a lot of firms that were just not familiar with the type of work that they might be doing for the department. So there's been a lot of questions about what type of projects we might be asking them to work on. So that's been a lot of the phone calls that we've been answering lately.
And just to clarify, the bulk of your firms are in your 4, 3,